Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Real and the Rare. My name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Mad Mouth, and alongside of me is my co-host, Xavier McKnight. How you doing, Xavier?
Doing great, Scott. As always, it's great to be on the WSAN network. Great to be doing another edition of The Real and the Rare, and we hope everybody is ready for these hot, spicy entrees that we are dishing out in our kitchen this evening.
Great. So tell me a little about what your Friday night looked like. What were you doing on Friday night?
Well, on Friday night, President Donald Trump decided to have a press conference around 7 p.m. And for those who work in the media and you're used to having to stream press conferences, you know that he did not start on time. He didn't start last night until close around maybe 7:30. And I just felt, because I didn't know as long as he was going to be going last night, that's always a very unpredictable thing when it comes to he and his press conferences, very similar to Governor Ron DeSantis and the press conferences that he has on a daily basis as well, or usually on a daily basis. You never know how long-winded in the tooth those guys are going to be. So I decided that it was best for us to push back The Real and the Rare on tonight. But don't worry, those entrees are still hot, spicy, ready to be dished out, and hope you all are ready to eat everything that's on the plate.
That's a beautiful thing. Well, you know what? Let's go ahead and take it away.
Well, yes, as we spoke about on Thursday night, we were supposed to have a different conversation tonight pertaining to the NBA and the NHL bubbles, but that's going to have to wait a while, ladies and gentlemen, because something came across my radar on yesterday that absolutely got my ticker going off.
Really?
So as I was working yesterday for WWSB ABC7, where I am employed in Sarasota, Florida as a digital content producer, a story came across my radar yesterday. It was a very local story here where a man was arrested for allegedly sexually assaulting a teenage girl and holding her against her will. But the details that come within this story leads to why we are here tonight. Before I proceed to continue, for this dirtbag, I am not here to make any excuses for what he did. I will never make excuses for men, women, or anybody who does these types of things. Scott and I have done an entire show on this type of content before. As a matter of fact, it was our previous broadcast of The Real and the Rare, where we were talking about sexual assault, and we were talking about child abuse, and we were talking about capital punishment. And as far as I'm concerned, this gentleman deserves to suffer the fate of capital punishment. But then there are going to be those who may say no. So I'll go into some of the details of this story right now. Once again, this was a story that happened out of Manatee County. It's Bradenton based. I'm not sure if he is a Bradenton man or not. That part was not made sure in the probable cause affidavit from the Manatee County Sheriff's Office. But once again, the headline for the story is man arrested for allegedly sexually assaulting teenage girl and holding her against her will. So this is a man who was arrested once again for allegedly raping a 13-year-old girl and holding her against her will in Manatee County. And according to the report from the sheriff's office, the girl was reported missing by her mother on June 14th as a runaway child. And when her mother located her just 2 days later, her daughter told her that she had been held against her will for the previous 3 days. And her mother, according to deputies, then proceeded to take her daughter immediately to a local hospital, the Manatee Memorial Hospital. And she also contacted the Manatee County Sheriff's Office about the incident. And when deputies met with the girl at the hospital, she admitted to them that she ran away from home and she went to a local food market. And this is where the spiciness of this story really goes in depth. So, a Hispanic male who was later identified as Genaro Ramirez Tatiano, he reportedly drove up in a blue Chevrolet Impala, said to be a newer model of the Chevrolet Impala. And he allegedly offered the girl money in exchange for sex. And according to the report, the teenager willingly got into his car, and the two drove to a Days Inn hotel and got a room where they engaged in consensual sex and smoked marijuana. Now, in the probable cause affidavit, it should be mentioned that it was not made clear whether she willingly decided to participate in smoking the marijuana. That part was not made clear. But this is something that took place. But after a while of them engaging in consensual sex with each other, the teen got tired or didn't want to participate in the activity anymore. And this is when deputies say that this man wouldn't let her go for the next few days, and he forced her to have sex, forcing himself on her in a very forceful way. And he was also making some type of verbal threats towards her. The things that he said, they were not made painstakingly clear in the probable cause affidavit. Not that they necessarily needed to be, because we understand what's taking place here right now. She's being raped, even though the first part of this was consensual sex. And the report goes on to say that this man went as far, and this is an incident, by the way, Scott, this happened back in June. And it just came across our radar on our radar yesterday, because this is when the man was arrested. He was arrested on Friday. He was finally taken into custody after a little over a month and a half of these actions taking place. So the report goes on to say that on June 16th, this man went as far as calling a friend to come to the hotel room that he checked out for he and the girl to participate in these activities, and to make sure that she did not leave the hotel room. He did this because he had to go to work on this day. However, the friend eventually left the hotel room, and this is when the 13-year-old girl proceeded to call one of her friends to pick her up. And after this incident was reported to the Manatee County Sheriff's Office, she was able to pick this man out of a photo lineup of a group of other men who may have come close to matching his description. The man has been arrested, and he is currently being held at the county jail. Now, once again, I want to preface my comments and everything I'm about to say simply by saying I make no excuses for this dirtbag, this sicko. Whatever happens to him is going to happen to him. And it's not even just because of the fact that this is a teenage girl. Girl, boy, man, woman. When somebody is saying no, when somebody is saying enough, when somebody is saying I'm tired, when somebody is saying I don't want to do this anymore, you lay off. Now, the bit of the part of this that becomes the slippery slope in all of this is that this all began as consensual sex. So I don't want to exploit this girl any further, because she did, according to the report, willingly get into this man's car after he made an offer to her for money in exchange for sex. But my problem with this entire thing, besides this man, is why was this girl running away from home in the first place? What was going on that led to the activity of her running away from home and running away to a supermarket or a local food mart, I should say, and ending up in the car with this man, and these activities taking place, beginning as consensual sex, then leading to more of a traumatic experience, because when she no longer wanted it to be consensual, this man obviously was not willing to let up, unfortunately, in her case. But the question I continue to ask is, what was possibly going on at home? What is possibly the lead up to this? And those are questions that I know I'm not going to get answered, because that information isn't going to be out there for us. But this leads to me saying, parents, you need to do a better job of watching your children. And I'm not saying that this girl's mother or her parent or guardian not watching her carefully is what led up to these unfortunate events happening. But in more cases than not, we all know somebody who is either a parent or is a friend of someone who is a parent, and they're not necessarily watching their children the way that they should. They're not paying attention to things. You're not paying attention to patterns of behavior that may be changing. You're not paying attention to characteristic traits that might be changing. How are your children now all of a sudden wanting to dress? How are your children now all of a sudden doing in school? How are your children now all of a sudden speaking to you? Because there comes a certain age, and I understand that peer pressure is real. And that's what leads up to some of these things happening anyway. You have children who go to school with other children who get influenced by things that we see in the mainstream world, unfortunately. And then they may fall under the influence of it too. But that's when it's on the parents to step in and try to control as much of this as possible. And it starts by paying attention at home. Before I go any further, Scott, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. The guy that was arrested, did he have a track record for being a sexual offender? What was the extent of his criminal record, if there was one?
There was no mention about that whatsoever in the probable cause affidavit.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, again, you're talking about a young lady that ran away from home, voluntarily went into an automobile, and then proceeded to go to a hotel room. I mean, I'm not going to go out there and take the sides of the guy that went out there and supposedly paid her and took her to the hotel. But that young lady had no business even going with this stranger to begin with. She didn't.
And that's the point. And that's the point that I'm getting to with this is, what is possibly some of the behavior that could have led up to this? Was there something going on at home? Like, is there a rift between her and her mother? And like I said, these are things we're never going to know about.
Right.
But this is just one incident out of many incidents that happen throughout our country and happen throughout our world on a daily basis, where some children get to do what they want to do because they're not properly being parented by their parents.
Right.
And once again, I want to say this so everybody understands. I am not blaming this child's mother for her running away from home, because we don't know what led up to that. But what I do know is that a lot of this stuff is happening in our world. It's happening in our country, and more times than not, is because parents aren't necessarily paying attention to their children the way that they should.
Right.
They're not necessarily showing them the type of unconditional love that they should. And I have a message I want to send to some people out there right now. When I say show love, I'm not saying to buy them materialistic things.
Right.
Because that's not showing love. That's buying love. And eventually that's going to run out. And if that's your way of showing love, you need to do better. Quite simply. I'll bring some key scenarios into this thing, Scott.
Okay.
And before I say them, I want to be very conscious of the fact that there are some children who don't get to have this luxury because their parents may not be in their lives for whatever reason. They may have chose not to be in their children's lives. They may have been taken out of their children's lives by death or sickness or whatever the case may be. So I want to be very conscious of that before I speak on what I'm about to speak on. I am not addressing those children and those families that may have to necessarily experience that. I'm addressing the parents in particular who have the option to go home to their children every single night. And they all may not be sitting down around the table having dinner and discussing how the day went. That's something that I grew up on. That's something that when I was growing up, it was something that was kind of normalized in American family households, at least from what textbooks told us. That's what I'll say in regards to that. But, Scott, you've heard of these scenarios, families getting together, having game nights with each other, watching movies with each other, watching family-friendly television series with each other, or just gathering around the table to talk and express themselves and to let everyone know how they're feeling. even though sometimes some people are holding back some things on how they're feeling because they may be a little too hurt to talk about it. They may be a little too shy to talk about it, whatever the case may be like this. But it appears that we are seeing a decrease in those types of activities in this social media and advanced technological world that we live in. And I can't say that as a fact for most families, but I've seen it in some cases where parents may go home and cook for their children, but they don't sit around the table with them and have dinner with them and discuss how the day went and how was school, do you need any help with your homework?
Right.
These are things that matter no matter how much people may try to play them up. Now, when I was a child, of course, I didn't understand the full context of all of this, but I absolutely get it now because there are things that children may not understand how to appreciate in that moment, but once they get older, they will have a great appreciation for it. And me being a key example, I have the greatest appreciation for my parents and the others that helped raise me. Because as I like to say, it takes a village to raise a child. And my parents were in my life every single day. But I had others around me who were also helping raise me and to help keep me on the right track. Would not even come close to allowing me to get involved in the wrong types of activities. We had dinner with each other. My parents asked me about my schoolwork. My parents held me to a high standard when it came to my schoolwork. If it was something that I didn't understand, they would try to help me understand it through themselves and their knowledge. And if they didn't understand it, they would go out and they would get somebody to come in and help me understand it. And these days, you're not exactly sure how many of these kids are coming home to parents who will help them with their homework and to make sure that they're eating proper nutritious meals and to make sure that they're getting a respectable amount of sleep to help them function on a day-to-day basis. And I'm not speaking to any demographic in particular, any ethnicity with what I'm about to say, because it happens in every single ethnicity and every single nationality in some form or fashion. Kids are not getting to eat the best nutritious meals. They're not getting to put the proper fruits, vegetables, grains, and meats in their bodies. Some kids come home every day and their parents bring them fast food. And they're not sitting down with them and they're not helping them with their homework and they're not paying attention to what they may be looking at on their phones, what they may be looking at on their TVs. And this is how you end up with incidents happening like what happened to this young 13-year-old girl right here. And it's a very unfortunate thing because as much as the girl had no business getting in the car with that man, my heart absolutely goes out to her and her mother during this time because we don't know what the details are that led up to this. Right. But I can only imagine how much of a traumatic experience this has been for her and how much of a traumatic experience it will continue to be for her.
Right. Because
this was not some 1 day, 1 hour ordeal. According to the probable cause affidavit, once again, this took place for 3 straight days because she was being held against her will according to the probable cause affidavit.
Right.
And no matter how much people may want to say, well, music and TV and movies and what you see on social media, that stuff is all entertainment. And in the end, it doesn't really matter. Yes, it does. It matters because it's an influencing product. The celebrities, they have an influence on not just children, but people in general. But I'm speaking in particular to children, in particular children between the ages of 10 to about 17 years old. Because some of this stuff happens before you even become a teenager. Scott, when I was growing up, I wasn't allowed to come home and turn on the latest music videos. That wasn't the deal. my parents had to know what those music videos were about, and they had to know the music that I listened to, and that was a huge ordeal for some of my other cousins that grew up around me too. We were raised almost similarly. But I also have other family members who could go home and do those things. And at the time, as a child, what you may be saying to yourself is, that's not fair. They get to do whatever they want to do. And I just wanted to see the video. I'm not going to start repeating the lyrics. I'm not going to start doing this. Here's just the fact of the matter. You don't know what you're going to start doing because you really don't know the type of influence that this is going to have over you. Some things have an influence on people without them even realizing that they're having an influence on them. It's tough to explain, but it is something that exists. Would you like to chime in this conversation before I go any further?
Well, let's understand that the legal system will take care of itself. There's no question that the young lady, first of all, was traumatized. I get that. Again, it's consensual. Rape, sexual assault, whatever. He'll get his due either way. I get that. But I can tell you one thing about this young child. She's lucky she wasn't killed. She really is. She can thank the man upstairs for knowing that she at least can, even though she may be mentally compromised right now, she's lucky that she isn't killed. My upbringing as a kid, I had 2 working class parents. My father was involved in a lot of my athletic activities, and my parents, I thought, a really good job. And more importantly, I think one of the things that helped me growing up as a child is my grandma Sophie. To me, is the greatest person that I ever was ever around. And you know, you talk about not only having the benefit of my own mother, but my grandma Sophie was a mother to me as well. And there are other people, but those are the 3. But you don't know what you have around the house. I didn't have anything to do with videos back then. You know, when I was 16 years old, you know, let's add a little bit of light to the thing. I had an 8-track tape player, you know, in my car, you know, as a teenager. But again, black and white TV, different thing. Not as many outside influences as today's children, young adults are exposed to. But again, I'm going to go back to what I said before. There's so many different gray areas that we don't know how that young child or 13-year-old, what went on inside the 4 walls. But the one thing that's common, Xavier, whether you're in 1962 to 2020, is you do have the ability to say no. That word still is in the English dictionary. No, I'm not going to go. But she did. That's really what it comes down to. We're talking about a guy, we don't know what his criminal history is, or if we do, nobody's divulging it. You know, we did a broadcast, like you alluded to earlier at the top, Martina McBride, Concrete Angel, child abuse. We've done, like you say, capital punishment. We've talked about sexual assault. 13 years old. Wow. And yet we don't know whether or not this guy, whether there could be a pregnancy involved. We don't know how far that actually went outside of what happened there in those 72 hours. I still want to find out. I'm anxious to track this story a little bit more to see what comes out of it. And, you know, you work with a guy named Bill Logan, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
You know, has he talked about this on the air or said anything pertaining to the subject at all?
No, not on this story, not at all.
Okay, just asking. All right.
And before you ask any more about it, yeah. I'm not sure who else has actually said something on the air about this story.
That's fine. Okay.
That part I'm not sure about.
That's no big deal. The bottom line isn't about who said what, who isn't, but you're talking about mainly parents needing to pay more attention to their children. Now, I will tell you that right now that my folks, with no disrespect to them, never did much to help me in my homework. Wasn't a big deal. I didn't need it anyhow. don't hold that against them. They were working class people. My dad had 2 businesses. He had an auto broker company, where they sell cars above cost. And he owned a sporting goods store. My mother was a full-time beautician, so they didn't have a lot of time. I was raised with babysitters and live-in housekeepers and so forth. You follow me? So it was a different story.
Yes.
So those are things that took place back in my childhood. But, what can I tell you? But there's no question that the parents need to pay more attention to their children. They definitely have to do it. Money only goes so far, right? You can't buy love, like you said. But there's just so many things that we just don't know about this whole thing.
And I'll continue simply, and I'll go back and say this for sure. I use the homework thing as an example of just bringing up ways that the family used to hold each other together, and they used to make sure that they were involved in people's lives. I understand that there are instances where parents are not able to be around to help their children out with their homework. People have jobs. People have to work. People have to put food on the table. People have to provide that shelter, and they have to put clothes on each other's backs. I get that 100%. I'm not referring to those parents in particular.
Right.
And there are other ways for them to continue to be involved in their child's life in some form or fashion. But I'm not calling those parents out in particular.
Right.
I'm calling out the parents who will allow their children to tell them that they want to wear inappropriate clothing, some type of hair that they have no business wearing at a young age, a certain type of earrings, maybe a certain type of lip gloss or makeup. And instead of looking at that child and seeing a child and saying, no, you're not ready for this yet, you're not mature enough for this yet, they will oblige to what the child wants to do.
Right. Okay. I get you.
And one of the reasons for that is because there are some people out there who are more interested in their child liking them and being their child's friend. Let's just call it like it is.
See, that's
something that we have to get out of.
See, back when I was growing up, sorry to interrupt you. People were allowed to hit their children a lot harder. You can use a belt, get spanked a lot. Now you try to utilize some of those behaviors, and you find yourself taking fingerprints over in jail. And because of social media, these same raising tactics are not only frowned upon, but they can be punishable in the legal system. Continue on.
Well, that's actually the perfect segue into where I was going to go with this next, because no surprise whatsoever to hear that. Parents were allowed to spank their children. They were allowed to hit them with belts, paddles,
right.
Some cases switches. And even back in those days, if students acted up at school, given the permission of the parent, the principals and the teachers also had permission to use paddles, belts, and switches on children if they were to get out of line. Of course, we know that doesn't exist anymore, especially not in the schools.
Right.
But what I want to say to that is, there are ways that people can discipline their children without having to put their hands on them. And I know that you're not saying that the ultimate form of discipline is giving somebody a spanking. I understand you're not saying that at all.
Right.
What I'm saying is there are some people out there who have this mindset that if timeout doesn't work, my next alternative is to hit my child with a belt, or to hit my child with a paddle, or to hit my child with a switch. No, it doesn't have to be that way. I'll give you a perfect example. Starters, I have a well-renowned love for sports.
Mm-hmm.
I developed this at a very young age. So one of the ways my parents would discipline me is if I got out of line, or if I brought home a grade I wasn't supposed to bring home, which didn't happen very often, it did not, or if they heard about my name being involved in something that it shouldn't have been involved in, it's very simple. You can't watch this game tonight. As a matter of fact, you can't watch games for the rest of the week.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, first of all, do you ever want to have kids, Xavier?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Well, there was a time when I did want to, but it was never meant to be. And, if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. Outside influences, technology, you see how a lot of these bad acts take place by everybody looking at it. They get ideas more than they, back in the day when I was growing up, all you had was local news. Great. Until I never saw cable. First time I ever saw cable was in 1979. I was up at Michigan State University with some friends, and first thing I ever watched was ESPN Sports Center. And that was in 1979. But I never even heard of cable TV. Now you got 200-300 channels, let alone satellite TV, more ideas, social media. I think you're right. The one way to get to you is either go ahead and take away what you love to do, can't watch sports for a while, or they ground you. You're not leaving your room for a while. Period.
Exactly. And I'll go a step further. It wasn't just sports. It was, you're not allowed to watch games. You're not allowed to play any video games at all, especially those containing the sports. I only play sports-related video games anyway. I don't participate in any of that other stuff, right, as we spoke about in the episode of Capital Punishment.
Right.
And we better not hear you speaking about a game at all. And as much as I love sports, it's like, okay, I better get my act together. If I don't want this to happen again, I better get my act together.
Right.
Because once again, I'm not someone who is a huge proponent of people putting their hands on children or people putting their hands on each other, period. Now, when it comes down to two adults and you have to throw down and you have to do what you have to do, hey, sometimes those things just happen. When it comes down to adults versus children and adults putting their hands on children, there are better ways behind that. Because statistically, what it tells us when those types of things happen is the children grow up and they end up being very violent towards others. Whether it's future children of their own, future life partners or spouses or girlfriends or boyfriends of their own. Like, a part of this stuff also is a huge prelude to why we have such a huge problem with domestic violence. Because children are being beaten and being spanked, but they're also watching other people in their household suffer that same fate too. And for some people, they may think that that is a normal reality, which it is not. Which is why I want to continue to express to everyone, there are other ways to discipline your children besides putting your hands on them. What's your child's favorite snack? What's your child's favorite ice cream? Child's favorite sweet thing to eat?
Right.
And they're not doing what they're supposed to do? Take it away. You see, in the household I grew up in, hamburgers and hot wings and ice creams and sub sandwiches, that stuff was a treat.
Right.
It wasn't a normality. It was a treat. You received those types of things when you did things that you were supposed to do. And more in the society we live in today, you have children who will walk up to their parents and tell them, I'm going to eat this today. And the parents will just sit there and go, well, okay, yeah, we can do that. And we have to get out of that. We have to get out of that mindset of where some of these parents will let their children run the household, telling them what they're going to eat, right, telling them what they're going to watch on TV, telling them what time they're going to go to bed, telling them what they're going to wear to school the next day. We have to get out of that.
Well, you got to understand something. Every household's different. Some feel that physical punishment is appropriate. Sometimes they figure I don't want to use deprive, but taking away things is the way. I think, but this thing goes deeper than that. Depends on what type of background that existing parent came from in terms of how they developed their own philosophical way of doing things. As a parent, you don't get a second chance to do it. there are no replays as a parent. You go by what happened to you. Now, the era is obviously different. What are you going to do? You know what I mean? So there are no do-overs. Once 1 through 18 goes, you just better hope and pray that you've done enough to protect your parents and your children as much as you can. And where along those lines from 1 through 18 do you make mistakes, trip up? Because you're right. You mentioned something earlier, peer pressure. Once you become a teenager and you have the ability to drive, you don't know who you're hanging around with. You don't know what's going to happen. All this physical punishment, that's what leads to murders and crimes and all kinds of things. But whether it's physical punishment, or you tell me the right way to stereotype non-physical punishment, what would be the best way for you to describe in 2 words what describes non-physical punishment?
The best way for me to describe that in 2 words would simply just be non-physical discipline. And I would have to use other examples like those that I just brought up as scenarios where you're taking away privileges.
All right, well, that's nice. So non-physical discipline is what we're talking about, right? So you have physical punishment versus non-physical discipline. One or the other. Now it becomes, to me, that's at the discretion of the parents what you're going to do. But there's so many external factors that tie into it, as I just alluded to before. How were they raised? The times. How many times have you seen a child kill their parent because they didn't like the way they were treated? And they're spending...
Absolutely.
Right.
And I do take that into account as well. And the more things that I'm very conscious of are children in particular who have to grow up in single parent households.
Right. There you go.
I'm conscious of that. I'm conscious of the fact that some of these parents are only going based off of what they know. I'm conscious of the fact that some of these parents are trying.
Right.
With that being said, I'd like to take my hat off at this time to those parents who are saying, I'm trying, but I want to do better.
Right.
What do I have to do to get better? People who are willing to sit down and self-assess themselves to say, how can I be the best mother? How can I be the best father? How can I be the best guardian of this child or of my children? Because there is no book when it comes to parenting.
Right.
It's not.
I agree. It's not take 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Okay. This is what we're doing. And you hope and pray that communication, and I utilize the word communication here, registers. Whether it's nonverbal, verbal, regardless, it's communication. And by the way, I got a degree in communication. Does that make me the best communicator on the planet? No. I'm not going to say that. But communication. Because that will determine the actions of each party and how you proceed from there. You know, you have a lot of...
And another thing that we also have to take into account, and I'm very conscious of this too, some parents are learning on the fly as well as their children are also learning and growing themselves.
Right.
Of course, we take all of these things into account. But as you alluded to earlier, this young girl was very fortunate that she was not killed. Because this very well could have been disastrous to that level. Right. It's already traumatic enough. And the only thing you're glad about is that she's still here to tell her story.
Right.
You absolutely hate that she has to live with this for the rest of her life.
Right.
And you feel for her mother, too, in this scenario, because you don't know what the lead-up was that even led to her running away from home in the first place, as I've said many times here tonight. And I keep saying this because I want people to understand that I am not blaming this child's mother for this happening. It's just a very unfortunate incident. And it's one of those lessons that parents absolutely hope they don't have to go through in order to learn, okay, I need to take better control of this situation. I need to start watching my child. I need to start paying more attention to what my child's doing. Right. I hope it doesn't ever have to come down to instances like this.
I agree.
But it also doesn't help that we live in the advanced technological world where we live in, where it's very rare these days where you're around someone who is between the ages of 40 and I'm going to go as low as 6 years old, and they don't have a phone, a tablet, an iPad, or something in their hand to keep them distracted.
Unbelievable how you bring up the phone situation. You know, the first time I ever saw a cell phone, ready for this? Playing Little League ball, Southfield, Michigan. Umpires aren't there. One of my coaches happened to have a cell phone in his car and dialed it. And these things are mounted into the automobile. All right, not the handheld ones, which would come many, many, many years later, and had to call the commissioner of the league, and they had to get umpires out there. That's the first time I ever saw a cell phone. Nowadays, we got cell phones they're nothing but distractions. You don't know whether or not these kids are on computers playing around on Craigslist. Craigslist is one of the most dangerous places you can go. There might be some things you get, but Craigslist is really dangerous. This particular incident you're talking about, it happened on the street. How many times have you heard things where Craigslist has been in the news? I'm sure it probably has, right?
It has, but it hasn't happened as often as you may possibly take a guess at it happening. I can actually count on one hand since I've been down here. It's only been about 2 or 3 times.
Right.
Where something Craigslist related ends up leading to something that it shouldn't lead to.
Still out there, though. That's all I'm telling you. If it happens one time, it's too many. Because back in the day, when I was growing up, and a lot of people, Craigslist didn't exist. All it takes, but it's still out there. You're right. Technology can either be our best friends or our worst enemy, right?
Yes.
That's what the whole moral of the thing is about. Why do you think you have a lot?
And I'll say 2 more things about this, too.
Sure.
Parents are not going to be able to control every single thing that their children do. Let's just go ahead and get that one out of the way. Because when they go to school, especially when they get into high school, they're going to see things. They're going to hear things. Parents can't have a leash on their children 24 hours a day. This is unless maybe they're homeschooled, but at some point you have to allow your child to also grow up and experience life. And as you said, Scott, what the parents have to trust is I've done a well enough job that my child knows right from wrong and knows what he or she should and should not be doing.
So you hope. Because everything ties back to peer pressure. You can take him as far as you can go at some point or another. You hope and pray that the baton gets handed over to the next situation. How do you view life, Xavier? And it's a very open-ended question, and I'm not worried about whether or not you get it right. I want to know how you view life as you approach your way towards, becoming a better person and how to deal with people.
I view life as very fragile. I view life as very precious. I view life as something that no one should take for granted.
If you had to define life based on a game, a board game, how would you go ahead and define life? Based on a board game.
I would say chess.
Me too. Very good. Glad you got it. Not only is it one move at a time, but 3. You have to think 3 steps. I'm not going to get into some of the outside influences that I've had, coaches-wise, that I've worked with in the sports writing or whatever. But that's the answer I was looking for, is chess. We just have to hope that not only do we teach those individuals affected by it with chess, but we hope and pray that they, not only do they get it, they have to apply it. One thing to learn it, it's another to apply it. Why would you? Well, when I asked you the question about chess, were there any other games? You were pretty decisive with that answer. But why did chess hit you right away?
Because it's a very complex game.
Exactly.
And that's what life is. Life is very complex.
Yep. But you were very, very decisive. You didn't even have to think that one through, did you?
No, not at all.
It was pretty straightforward. And that's exactly how I've approached it my entire life, too. Chess game. Some people learn chess as a kid playing the board game. That was one of the games I learned very, very young as a kid. You know, and I think that when you tie this whole concept together about parents needing to pay more attention to their children, and I know I've talked about that a lot. Okay, we've talked about certain ways for which they need to do, but we're not in the business to give parental advice because we're not there. We're not there. I can
only go based off of my own experiences.
Right.
What I can tell you is, like I said, certain foods that are a normality in many households, they were a privilege and they were a treat in my household. And I'd be out in my neighborhood, I'd be out playing sports, be out playing with some of the other children when there would be other children around, playing basketball or playing games, whatever it is we played.
Right.
The rules are very simple.
Right.
Don't get into any trouble. Don't allow anybody else to get you into any trouble. And you better be back in the house before the street lights come on.
Right. Well, then you were raised well. Were you raised with both your parents?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Well, there you go. And I had.
And that point alone is exactly why I say I do take into account. And I'm very conscious of the fact that there are children, many of them, who grow up in single-parent households.
Right. Or you got broken families, too.
Yes. And my heart weeps for those people, honestly. It does, because there's only so much that can be done here. But behavior patterns, characteristic traits, these things have to be... You have to pay attention to certain things when you start to see a shift into some things.
Right.
I know that a child is not going to be the same at 14 years old as they were at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13 years old. You're going to change. As life goes on, people change.
Right.
This is why this is why the best way that some people sum up life is to simply call it the theory of evolution. Because you evolve into whatever it is that you evolve into. It just is what it is. However, what I am saying is that what are some of the changes that are taking place with some of these children? Yes, you're not going to be the same as you were at 10 as you are at 14. But what are things that now pique your interest? How do you now all of a sudden want to dress? Right. How do you now all of a sudden want to just do certain things that seem a little out of the norm for what a 14-year-old should be doing? The earliest you should be participating in some of these activities may be 16 and 17.
Right.
And this is where it comes back into play to where I say parents have to do a better job now of taking control. And once again, I'm not calling out all parents when I say this.
Right.
Because we have some fantastic, fabulous parents out there who have done a great job of raising great children who are now adults or becoming adults. And we have fabulous, great parents out there who are raising children to be great people. I'm not calling out all parents. I want everyone to understand that.
Right.
But there's just no way that children should be allowed to run the household. It's something that just should not happen. You don't get to make up the rules.
Right.
That's not how this structure is supposed to go. And one other thing I want to say about this story is it's unknown in the probable cause affidavit whether this man knew that this was a 13-year-old girl.
Right.
With that being said, this is where I remind everyone, I make no excuses for him whatsoever. Because this goes back to what I said at the very start of this broadcast. No means no. Someone says, I'm tired, I want to take a break, or I want to stop, or any type of indication of no. You stop.
Right.
Just is what it is. This could be a 13-year-old girl. This could be a 31-year-old woman. When someone says stop, you stop. And this also works vice versa too. Because domestic violence and sexual assault, it's not just men beating on women. Women also beat on men.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not just men beating on children. Women also beat on children. This is an all-around spectrum.
Right.
So I want everybody to understand that I am not narrowing this down to the case of just wanting to hold men in particular accountable for actions that they partake in when it comes down to something like this. No, this goes out to everybody who may be participating in these types of activities.
Right.
No means no. And when you're holding someone against their will, that's wrong anyway too.
Right. I agree.
And as you said, Scott, we just hope for the sake of what was told in this probable cause affidavit, the details that were revealed. We just hope that this girl doesn't end up pregnant with a baby that she didn't ask to have.
No, she didn't ask to have it, but let me go ahead and reemphasize that while she didn't ask to have it, she set herself up for a problem by going with a stranger. How many times have you been brought up?
Absolutely.
Don't go with strangers. Now, do some people get it? No. But she did go with a stranger. It's one of the biggest lessons
that we get taught as children, as early as kindergarten.
Right.
Don't talk to strangers.
Right. So, again, I mean, and that doesn't count the amount of, she'll need a psychologist or a psychologist to hopefully get things off her chest. Or what is a psychologist, or what's the other term for it?
A psychiatrist or a psychologist.
There you go. Thank you. She'll probably need one of those. Other people call them shrinks. But regardless of that, who's to say that she may not need to address that at some point down the road? I just think the young lady's very fortunate to be alive.
Yes.
I really do. 13 years old, going through a traumatic experience like that. What have you heard about the mother? Has she commented much on the matter a lot?
No, not at all.
Okay. And again, this area happened in where you currently live right now. Has there been community reaction about what took place here?
Here's one thing that I will share with you.
Okay.
And it's not even regarding this story in particular.
Okay.
During the latter part of June, all the way up until about the middle point of July, there was almost a child, in particular a teenager, coming up missing every single week in this area.
Okay.
Now, they all were eventually found safely and taken back to their families, which, of course, we're very grateful for. But in some of these cases, Some of these children have been gone for as much as 3 weeks.
Okay.
And in some of the cases, they were also considered to be runaways, just like this girl was considered a runaway. Now, what are these children possibly running away from? We don't know. What are they running to? We don't know.
Right.
But we're very fortunate that those children have been found safely and they're back with their families, and we hope that everything is well with them. And you said it a couple of times already. I've said it too, but I'll emphasize it again. This girl is very grateful that she is still here and she is alive.
Right.
But that was something that was definitely of a great concern just about a month ago, of how many children were coming up missing in this area.
Well, good. I'm glad that some of them have resurfaced. I'm glad. I remember many years ago when I first lived here in South Florida, I believe it was 1981, and then from 84. And then I ended up going to Tampa from 84 to 86. Adam Walsh, you remember him, right? Was abducted in a Hollywood mall and then subsequently got killed. And then his dad, John Walsh, went out there and utilized his son's tragedy and has been prominent trying to go after child abductions and has done a marvelous job through the years trying to build off his son's tragedy. Now, we could do a whole show for that, so I'm not going to go there. But the reality of the situation was child abduction, thanks to John Walsh, was something that he had to bring to awareness, and there was certainly a lot of publicity long before social media ever existed. You ever watch John Walsh's documentaries and TV shows and things like that?
No, I have not, but it is something that I will put on my itinerary.
Yeah, I would. Happened in Hollywood, Florida, the Hollywood Mall, I believe it was right off of. It was in Hollywood, Florida. Yeah, look it up. But again, his son did not run away. His mom and the child, Adam Walsh at the time, he happened to be in a mall and he got abducted from a mall. Different story altogether. But an unfortunate ending. Very unfortunate ending. What else you want to add to this?
I'm pretty much ready to wrap up this conversation. I just simply like to close by once again emphasizing and putting a plea out there to some of these parents. And I say it like that because I'm not addressing every single parent. As I said earlier, I understand that there are some great parents out there. I understand that there are some parents that are absolutely trying their hardest. I am simply addressing the parents that are not doing the best job possible when it comes down to monitoring and watching their children. Please do better so we don't end up with more instances like this happening. And once again, as Scott and I have both said here tonight, we're very fortunate that this did not end up being a fatal situation.
Well said. I got to tell you, irony, we're doing this broadcast, and my grandpa, Sidney Morganroth, was actually born 103 years ago today. Of course, he's been dead since 1973 due to cancer, but it's ironic that we're doing a broadcast where we're talking about parents and grandparents. So wherever my grandfather is at up in heaven, love you, Grandpa Sidney Morganroth, and miss you very much. So just thought I'd put that out there as well. So well done, well thought of. Well thought of.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And we hope that we have really been able to touch someone, if it's just one person tonight with this broadcast that we did, because it's something that we just see far too much. Instances that happen with children that don't necessarily have to happen. But part of the problem may be the fact that the parents are not taking control of the situations or watching exactly what the children are doing the way that they should be. And once again, I'll say this again, and it'll be the last time I say it tonight. I am not holding this girl's mother accountable for what happened to her. Yes, in the probable cause affidavit, it said that she ran away from home, but we don't know why she ran away from home.
All right.
So it's not fair to look at her mother and say that this is her fault. We don't know what led to the girl running away from home. You know, we wish them all the best. And we really hope that this ends up being a learning experience for the both of them. And truthfully, we hope and we just pray for their strength with this entire situation going forward. The girl is traumatized. I can only imagine how her mother feels knowing that her daughter went through something like this.
Now, is this young lady, this is a single parent situation, is that correct or not?
That part is also not clear.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
Interesting. We've talked about it all this long, but we don't know whether or not this is a single parent or a mother and father together. I mean, it's okay. I'm just curious more so than anything else. But that's okay. Nevertheless, the mother's traumatized, and the daughter certainly went through quite a bit, too. But meanwhile, everybody, you're listening to The Real and the Rare WSAN Network. My name is Scott Morganroth with Xavier McKnight. We love doing this broadcast. We do it a couple of times a month. Our goal in the future is to be able to take the real and the rare and do a video of it. We're going to work toward that. That will also subsequently appear on a YouTube channel. But meanwhile, we've had a really good broadcast with Xavier and I. And as a result, we try to go ahead and talk about the important subjects, don't we, Xavier?
We definitely do. My apologies for that,
right.
Ladies and gentlemen. A slight technical difficulty happened right there.
It's okay. But yeah, as I was mentioning to the audience before, our aim here is to not only take this broadcast and continue doing it so you can hear it, but eventually doing it visually as well. No big deal. And we're working toward that. So, meanwhile, Xavier, why don't you let everybody know how they can go ahead and reach you?
Yes, you can follow me on Twitter at XTMCKNIGHII. The two I's at the end are both capitalized. You can send me a follow request on LinkedIn just by typing in Xavier McKnight. You can follow me on Instagram at XMCKNIGH22, and you can send me a friend request on Facebook just by typing in Xavier McKnight.
All right, and everybody, just so you know, you can listen to The Real and the Rare and all of our other shows on Apple Podcast, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Google Podcasts. Subscribe to The Real and the Rare through the following, once again, Apple Podcast, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Google Podcasts, or for that matter, wherever you get your podcasts. To reach myself, you can follow us at Tribune South. That's at Tribune South on Twitter. Facebook, South Florida Tribune. Just go ahead and like the page. Instagram, South Florida Tribune. We have a YouTube channel, South Florida Tribune. Xavier and I will certainly be looking to go ahead and try to build the platform even more that way as time progresses. Our website is www.southfloridatribune.com. Our email address is southfloridatribune@gmail.com. And on LinkedIn, you can reach me, Scott Morganroth. Now, when you go to southfloridatribune.com, you can also find these broadcasts there as well. We have great articles from our writers. We also have a lot of our media distribution partners in addition to the show. So we have everything on the website, so feel free to check it out. So any closing thoughts, Xavier?
Well, just once again, we really hope that we've been able to touch someone with this broadcast tonight. We really hope that with this broadcast tonight, may be the start of parents paying more attention to their children if these are indeed some of the things that need to happen in certain households. Once again, we're not addressing every household. But as we also do on every single show, we would like to continue to remind everyone to continue to take all of the proper precautions and safety measures that you need to take as we continue in this fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. Wear your mask, put on your gloves, wash your hands, do your best to not touch your face, and don't gather in large crowds, and do your best to stay at home as much as possible. If you have to go to work, go to work. If you have to go to the grocery store, go to the store. If you have to get food, go get food. If you have to get necessities, get necessities. But stay away from people as much as you want. Now is the time to only focus on necessities and not necessarily the desires and the wants of our hearts at this moment. We continue to fight this thing the way that it needs to be fought, and we take the precautions we need to take. We'll get back to living in a time and a day and an era where we will be able to focus once again on the desires and the wants of our hearts. But now is not the time. We need everyone to continue to be smart, be precautious, and use your common sense.
All I can tell you is I couldn't have said any better. So listen to the X-Man. That's what he's stirring up in the kitchen. I agree. Ditto! Exclamation point. So, meanwhile, on behalf of Xavier McKnight, my name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Madmouth. Thank you for joining us on The Real and the Rare. Xavier McKnight can also be heard on other broadcasts. I know one that he comes on quite a bit is the Sports Exchange, and he will be coming on also lots of different ones as well. So he's made his rounds, and actually his next appearance will be on our fantasy football broadcast with Ryan Scorer. So on behalf of Xavier McKnight, my name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Madmouth. Thank you for giving us your time and joining us tonight. Now we look forward to our next edition of The Real and the Rare. Good night, everybody.